like this surah for?
وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وآله الطيبين الطاهرين.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وجل فرج.
So today we're going to discuss inshallah Surah Aadiyat, one of these shorter surahs, and we'll try to finish it today in one session inshallah. So we'll go a bit more quickly so we don't leave any verses out from the end. This surah, of course, is one of the Mekki surahs, one of these shorter surahs in the end of the Quran, and it is said to have been revealed. There's some difference of opinion, of course, about the sabab and nuzul of the verse, but it's said to have been revealed after the battle of Dhatul Salasil, the battle of the Salasil, the chains, in the year 8 after Hijrah. So, according to history, the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ was told that there was an army of horsemen from various Arab tribes who had gathered to kill him and to crush the Muslims. And they say that they numbered up to 12,000 soldiers, this army of the enemies. And a group of companions was then sent to negotiate with them. And they returned then without having sort of succeeded in negotiating a truce. And then the Prophet sent Imam Ali alayhi salam with an army to confront the enemy. Of course, first Imam Ali alayhi salam, before he fought them, he called them to Islam and sort of called them to submit and surrender and to avoid the bloodshed and the fight, but they refused. So in history, of course, pitched battles were in the sense that like the armies came, they came on a battlefield, and then they sort of fought each other at the agreed upon time. So then they agreed that okay, we will fight tomorrow. So then what the Muslims did is that then in the dawn they raided the enemy camp. So as soon as the day sort of the tomorrow came, they immediately sort of charged the enemy. And they sort of won. They routed the enemy very quickly, and they won. And lots of prisoners were taken and loot and so on and so forth. And it became known as the Dhatul Salasil, the battle of the chains, because so many sort of enemies were imprisoned in this battle. Of course, there's another famous battle of Dhatul Salasil by Khalid ibn Walid and Hurmuz, the Persian general, in the year 12 after Hijrah. But that's sort of you shouldn't confuse it with the sabab and nuzul of this verse, obviously. So that's not when we talk about that. It's not this sort of first, not the second battle of the Salasil, but the first one.
So the Prophet was not present in this battle of chains.
No, and obviously there's some who say that no, this is revealed much earlier, this verse, that this is then, it's a Mekki surah, as we mentioned, and that obviously some say that it's a Madani, but that this battle is just a clear mistaq, so to speak, an instance that this surah could refer to, but it's not actually, it wasn't revealed because of this. In any case, the context of the surah, we can read the translation now. وَالْعَادِيَاتِ ضَبْحًا, by the snorting chargers. فَالْمُورِيَاتِ قَدْحًا, by the strikers of sparks, in parentheses, with their hoofs. فَالْمُغِيرَاتِ صُبْحًا, by the raiders at dawn. فَأَثَرْنَ بِهِ نَقْعًا, raising therein a trail of dust. فَوَسَطْنَ بِهِ جَمْعًا, and cleaving therein a host. So very clearly it is talking about some sort of battle. Yes. Of course, there are some who say that no, it's not talking about a battle at all, and it's referring to the sort of Hujjaj who come to Hajj on top of their camels. This is a less popular tafsir mentioned for this, but it is, as we shall see, backed up by some narrations. So that's why some have been of this opinion. However, usually scholars say it's talking about the battle, whether it's Dhat al-Salasil or in general.
It is called Dhat al-Salasil.
Dhat al-Salasil, yeah, the battle of the chains.
And Zat means
That,
very.
of something. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so the verse is, of course, one of the beautiful parts of this surah when we're practicing our recitation, as I mentioned, is that it's quite sort of melodious, and in fact it is what they call onomatopoeic. So onomatopoeia is this, when we describe something by using words that sound like that thing that is being described. So if I want to describe a rusty old train, coming to a stop in the station, then I might say that, the rickety train creaked and cranked as it screeched to a halt in the station. So all these words, rickety, cranked, clacked, da-da-da, it's all words that are, when you hear them, you hear the sort of train as it's creaking and clanking to a halt. And screeching to a halt, etc. So this is what's called onomatopoeia. So this is well, وَالْعَادِيَاتِ ضَبْحًا فَالْمُورِيَاتِ قَدْحًا. So if you're imagining horse riders, yeah, وَالْعَادِيَاتِ ضَبْحًا فَالْمُورِيَاتِ قَدْحًا فَالْمُغِيرَاتِ صُبْحًا. So it has that rhythm and the sound of these horsemen as they're riding, and their hooves are, striking the stones. Of course, the horseshoes have the iron on them, so when they're striking the stones, then the sparks are flying from those hooves. So you can hear this sort of action and this event while you're listening to this surah. And of course, onomatopoeia is something that we, of course, any good sort of work of literature will use it from time to time. Of course, not overused, then it becomes childish, but is used in many great works of literature quite commonly, and it's a great sort of literary tool, and we find it elsewhere in the Quran as well. So, for example, we talked about Nas last week. So, min sharril waswasil khannas. Waswas is one of those onomatopoeic words in it. So, waswas meant to whisper. Waswas sounds like the someone is whispering in your ear. Or for example, we have in Surah Fajr, إِذَا دُكَّتِ الْأَرْضُ دَكًّا دَكًّا, when the earth is shattered in a shattering. دُكَّتِ الْأَرْضُ دَكًّا دَكًّا, it sounds like yeah. So it's sounding like this sort of crushing of that. So this sort of things are used. So the surah starts with وَالْعَادِيَاتِ ضَبْحًا, here translated by the snorting chargers. Adiyat comes from, it's a plural of adiya, which comes from the word adwa, which literally means to separate something from something and sort of leave it to go away from it. So this can happen in many different ways. So for example, it can be when you separate your heart from something and you leave that something, so then you find the enmity between yourself and that thing. So this is where we get the word adu, which means enemy in Arabic, or adawa. Or it can have the meaning of running, udu. So for example, we run away from something, or it can be in interactions. So udwan also that sort of enmity where we refuse to cooperate together, we sort of go away from each other. But here, as the meaning of adiyat, to separate, as in to run, to move very quickly. So the sort of charger here, those who are running. And dhabh comes from, or it means the sort of loud panting of a horse. So when a horse is, of course, sprinting, etc., this panting that it does is the sort of it's called dhabh, and of course it's an onomatopoeic word as well, as we said, so it sounds like that. Dhabh, 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 as I'm running and making this sound, so dhabh sounds like that as well. So a lot of animal sounds, of course, in all languages are onomatopoeic, isn't it? So I say the dog woofed, or barked, or the cat meowed, or etc. So it sounds like those sounds, isn't it? Yeah? Of course, as I said, no, it's not the horses, but as we mentioned, the camels of the Hajjaj. So they're panting, as they're coming for Hajj, and they're carrying the people, so they're making that sound.
But I mean, would they, what do you say, reconcile by the raiders at dawn? I mean,
We'll come to the next verses as well.
The
So
Hujjaj.
we'll see that there is attempts to reconcile with all of them.
Okay.
So there's a narration mentioned in Majma al-Bayan by Allama Tabrisi when he does the tafsir of the surah. And in it, a man comes to Abdullah ibn Abbas, one of the famous sort of companions of the Prophet and a famous mufassir of the Quran and companion of Ali alayhi salam as well. And he asked sort of, what does it mean? وَالْعَادِيَاتِ ضَبْحًا. What is it referring to? And he said that these snorting sort of runners or sprinters or chargers here has been translated. And he replied to him that it means the sort of war horses. And then the same man went to Imam Ali alayhi salam, who was sort of doing his wudu, and then asked him, what does this وَالْعَادِيَاتِ ضَبْحًا mean? And he said that he asked him, Imam Ali alayhi salam, according to the narration, that who did you ask? Did you ask someone before he came to me? And he said, yeah, I went and I asked Ibn Abbas, and he said that it means war horses. He said, okay, go and bring him to me. And then Ibn Abbas came, and Imam Ali then sort of scolded him and said that sort of, don't talk about something if you're not aware. Don't give an answer about something if you're not 100% sure that that's the answer. And this surah, when this was revealed, in Badr we only had two war horses. So how could it be sort of talking about war horses? No, this is only Zubayr and Miqdad, they were the only ones who had these war horses. No, this is talking about the camels that come for Hajj. And of course, the more apparent meaning, and what's mentioned in other narrations, is that it's the sort of. Others have said that, well, perhaps if we want to accept this narration, perhaps Imam Ali sort of wanted to say that we shouldn't limit the meaning to war horses, but rather, in general as well in the Quran, we shouldn't limit the meanings of verses, but rather, if it's been mentioned in general way as it has been mentioned here, for example, then we can encompass all of those meanings. So don't limit to just war horses. It can also refer to the camels of Hajj, etc. So this is how they sort of try to reconcile this narration with other narrations and the sort of apparent meanings of the verses. So of course, but that's one of the beauties of the Quran, isn't it? And I mentioned this before as well. When something is left sort of more open, then we can sort of have all those various different meanings, and that's part of the beauty of the verses. That's why translations are always limiting, isn't it? Because they have to pick some sort of translation for it, usually, and that will sort of limit it to one of those possible meanings. So here, snorting chargers while charging is already taking us to the battlefield, whereas in Arabic it's more wider the meaning, so we can include different meanings. So that's why, again, you have to be a bit careful as well with translations, so they're never a translation is 100% accurate, isn't it? It'll always.
In the narration, Imam Ali said that it also means the camels.
No, he said that don't talk about what you don't know. If you're not sure about it. This, when this was revealed in Badr, we only had two war horses. It's referring to the battles, the camels for Hajj. So yeah, the apparent meaning of the narration is that it doesn't refer to war horses, but because we have other narrations that say it was referring to war horses, so then we try to reconcile this by saying that, well, this narration probably means that don't limit it to this one meaning of war horses, that it can mean war horses, but it can also mean camels of Hajj and so on and so forth.
Both these came in Majma al-Bayan?
In Majma al-Bayan, yeah. Yeah, of course, or there's some scholars can say, well, we reject this narration, it's not a correct narration, etc. But it can also be, as Ayatollah Makaram says, that, well, we don't have to choose one or the other, we can sort of reconcile it in this way.
If we look from one point of view, that this narration, which camel one is from Imam Ali, the other one is from Ibn Abbas.
No, this is all right, like that you mean?
Yeah.
Yes, but this is okay. This is still one narration, so we don't know if it's authentic or not, etc. So, yeah, obviously, but in general, it doesn't make a difference. I mean, we'll get to the point of this whole surah, but as I said, we shouldn't limit it. That's the best option we should go for. We don't limit it. Yeah, it can have the meaning of charging or going into Hajj, etc. And then he continues, فَالْمُورِيَاتِ قَدْحًا, by the strikers of sparks. Muriyat is the plural of Muriya, which comes from Ira, which means to light a fire. To light a fire, and qadh is the act of striking two things, like flint on steel or two stones on each other,
yeah.
or rubbing two wood, etc., to create a fire. So to strike two things together and light a fire therewith. So the strikers of sparks that then light a fire. Sort of course, they haven't translated like that in the English because it makes it longer than necessary, but that's sort of the meaning of the verses. And of course, as we mentioned, and here in the brackets you have in translation, with their hooves. So the idea is that, of course, the hooves had the horseshoes, the iron horseshoes. So then when they're running on the battlefield, there's stones there. When those hooves hit those stones at a high speed, produces sparks. So this sort of scene is, of course, here being made for us. As I said, it's a very beautiful surah. These sort of vows that we get in the beginning. This is all qasam, of course. By this, by that. So it's setting a very nice scene for us poetically. Yeah.
My question would be why? I think we discussed this before as well. But why is God taking oath on these things again?
Oh, we'll talk to that one. Yeah.
And
of course. Well, we can mention that quickly now, so we don't sort of forget. Of course, if this is talking about the war horses, then it's about the act, as we said, of the jihad and of fighting. And of course, this is something very high, sort of a very highly praiseworthy act. Mm-hmm. And therefore Allah wants to show that it's so praiseworthy that even these horses are something that Allah can swear by. Even these sparks that are flying from that act are something that He can swear by, because it's such a glorious act. Or if it's about Hajj, then again, Hajj is such a praiseworthy act, such a good thing, that even the camels that are going for the Hajj, even they become praiseworthy by relation to this act.
And
but as a literary device, of course, yes, where it's just building a scene for us, and it's bringing up a theme. And soon once we get to the end of the fourth verse, we'll discuss what theme is sort of coming up here and how it relates to the end of the surah.
Yeah. And also, like, camel doesn't have shoes, right? So it cannot produce sparks.
I don't know, camels, they don't shoe the camels?
I don't think so.
Yeah, or maybe not, yeah. But in any case, the Mufassirin who then go with the opinion of the camels here will say strikers of sparks are the Hujjaj who light fires to bake their bread. So it's not coming. This with their hooves, in parentheses, you would have to forget that, yeah. But they're striking the sparks. The Hujjaj are then striking the sparks. Some have even said that even if it's about the jihad, it's not with their hooves, but it's the soldiers who light fires. So they, same thing, they're lighting fires for their food. So swear by that. But of course, the more common opinion is from their hooves while they're charging, because that's sort of the context of the verses. It's talking about the horses here, and the whole scene that's being set of the charge, isn't it? So if you're talking about a charge, the whole scene of, okay, now they're attacking, which is what's going on here. They're raising their dust, they're attacking, they're charging, and so in the middle you go and talk about how they cooked food the last night. It kind of breaks the setting. فالمغيرات صبحا. مغيرات is the plural of مغيرة, which comes from إغارة, meaning to attack an enemy. So for example, in Farsi we say غارت كردان, which is the act of sort of taking the wealth when we attack, isn't it? So but yeah, the act of attacking, of engaging the enemy, إغارة. فالمغيرات صبحا, by the raiders at dawn. Subh, of course, is the dawn. فأثرن به نقعا, and they sort of raise the dust, raising therein a trail of dust. فوسطن به جمعا, and cleaving therein a host. So these two verses are sort of building this idea of the horsemen as they're charging through the battlefield, their hooves are are creating the sparks, they're raising the dust, and they go into the middle of the enemy. فَوَسَطْنَ بِهِ جَمْعًا, they cleave into the host of the enemy. So, as we said, this sabab nuzul of the army attacking at dawn, going into the middle of the enemy camp, engaging them, sort of routing them, and then taking them as prisoners. So, poetically, as I said, setting the scene for the charge. And of course, we might then ask that, okay, why, as he said, why is he swearing by this? And what's the connection then to the following verses? Indeed, man is ungrateful to his Lord, and indeed he is himself witness to that, etc., etc. So, to understand that a bit, of course, we have to look at, first of all, at what this surah resembles, or how this surah resembles other surahs in the Quran. So this structure, وَالْعَادِيَاتِ ضَبْحًا فَالْمُورِيَاتِ قَدْحًا فَأَثَرْنَ بِهِ نَقْعًا, this sort of structure, very similar structure, is found in many other surahs where Allah swears by His angels. For example, in Surah Al-Nazi'at, وَالنَّازِعَاتِ غَرْقًا وَالنَّاشِطَاتِ نَشْطًا فَالسَّابِحَاتِ سَبْحًا. Yeah? You can hear it, even if you don't understand Arabic, you hear it's quite similar to وَالنَّازِعَاتِ وَالْعَادِيَاتِ ضَبْحًا. Yeah, or in Surah Al-Musa, وَالْمُرْسَلَاتِ عُرْفًا فَالْعَاصِفَاتِ عَصْفًا. Very similar structure. In these verses, Allah is talking about His angels, how they come, وَالنَّازِعَاتِ غَرْقًا, when they come, the angels at the time of death, and they extract the soul from the body. They take in that which is hidden inside the human body. So now you compare this verse and how the soldiers are riding into the heart of the enemy camp, and they're sort of taking them, routing them, taking them as prisoners. So in the same way, the angels are diving into the inside of a person and taking out his soul. So this is, of course, reminding us of these other verses. Without anything sort of being mentioned in this surah, it's bringing us our mind to these other surahs that have a similar structure. And that's, of course, quite a powerful sort of literary device that's being used here, that you're expected to know the other sort of works by the author and take your mind to them and then draw conclusions through that. And of course, bringing into mind this sort of, so what are the themes that come to mind from this is, of course, the act of bringing out the secrets that are hidden inside a man's soul, to bring out those things which are hidden inside the core of a human being, taking out their soul, the moment of death, of course. All these are themes that come to mind. Of course, battle and death are connected to each other, and if we go to the structure, the idea of the angels coming and taking the soul at the moment of death, this sort of theme of death is quite strongly there. And of course, death itself is connected to the idea of the night. One of the themes here in the beginning, we're talking about the morning, the raiders coming at the dawn, coming as a surprise. So even in English, we sort of use this term, he sort of passed away in his sleep, or in Finnish we say even more clearly, "Hän nukkui pois," he sort of slept away when he died. So the idea of death and sleep being connected, that theme, of course, is something that comes quite explicitly in the Quran. So Allah, in the Quran, هو الذي يتوفاكم ثم يبعثكم فيه ليقضي أجلا هو الذي يتوفاكم بالليل ويعلم ما جرحتم بالنهار ثم يبعثكم فيه ليقضي أجلا مسمى. He is the one who makes you die, توفاكم, or takes away your soul at night, and He knows what you do during the day, and then He will bring you back to life for an appointed term. So this idea that Allah takes our souls at night, and then those who die, He keeps their souls, and those who are meant to live still until a certain appointed time, their soul returns to them. This idea of sleep and the separation of the soul from the body, and that sort of connection with death is, as I said, in all languages is present, but in the Quran quite explicitly comes here. So definitely a major theme that is brought to our mind here in this surah is the theme of death. So act of war, these soldiers attacking, people dying, etc., and the structure taking us to those surahs that talk about the angels of death taking away the person's soul and the whole nighttime, etc. Another theme that is there as well with death and this surah is the idea of surprise, that this sort of attack happened as a surprise attack at dawn, but then also the death coming as a surprise to us. That, of course, we all know that we're going to die, yet we don't want to think that it's going to happen now. And usually, for many people, it comes as a surprise. And those are the people who are sort of turned away from those reminders that they're going to die. And then when the moment of death does come to us, those that it comes to as a surprise, it's usually a disappointing surprise, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
It's an act of losing those things that you wanted. So, and there's nicely here as well, فَأَثَرْنَ بِهِ نَقْعًا, and they raise therein a trail of dust. The dust as well, of course, is taking our mind to death as well, isn't it? The word dust, which in the Quran is used for reminding us of how when we die we're going to turn into dust, and then that dust will be resurrected. So the idea of death and resurrection. It's also nicely mentioned in the poem of T.S. Eliot, The Wasteland. He quite nicely compares death to dust. I don't remember now the whole verses by heart, but he says, "And I will show you fear in a handful of dust." Of course, he means the idea of why would we be afraid of dust? Of course, because it reminds us of death. And anything that reminds us of death is something that we are afraid of. So the surah here, of course, is trying to tell us that, this death might come as a surprise. Those angels of death might come and take your soul away at night as a surprise. Now you're going to sleep tonight. How do you know this bed that you're sleeping in won't turn into your grave? It won't be the last time you sleep. Just like those soldiers weren't expecting. They thought, oh, we're such a strong army, we're going to go kill the Prophet, we're going to defeat all the Muslims. And then this surprise attack came and sort of took them all away. So, the theme of death, the theme of surprise, and finally we can mention the theme of war as well, because of course war is usually something that is motivated by the greed of some men, and the whole idea that, okay, we will raid them, we will plunder some wealth. This ighara, the point that I made of ighara, the sort of attacking and plundering. So again, this sort of reminder that why we are willing to do horrible things to each other for some very small worldly gain. So these are all the themes that come up there, and they're going to be reflected now in the following sort of 5 verses that are mentioned. So this is quite balanced surah as well. So we have 5 verses that have the oath, and then we have 5 verses that answer the oath, and then we have the last verse, verse 11, which sort of sums it all up. So it's a nice, very nice and balanced surah, kind of like Surah Ash-Shams as well. Has 7 verses of oath, 7 verses of answer to the oath, and then it's the 1 verse that sort of goes back to Allah and sums all of it up. Here is the same sort of structure here. So read the next 5 verses. Innal insana.
How does it again? I don't understand. How can we reconcile by the raiders at dawn raising therein a trail of dust with the camels of the Hujjaj? How do we?
So the Hujjaj being so many, they'll raise a trail of dust as well.
But then the raiders at dawn.
فَالْمُغِيرَاتِ صُبْحًا.
Yes.
So the idea, of course, when they have to all at once go in Hajj, you have the manasik, and you have to go all at once. If you haven't gone to Hajj, it might not be familiar, but there's certain places where you have to be at certain times.
In the morning?
At different times of the day. There's many different places where you have to go at certain times. So it is sort of like an attack when everyone, especially nowadays, when millions sort of move to one place, etc. So but of course, raider here is a translation that's limiting it to one. For Mughirat, the sort of the host that moves as one body, we could translate it like that. Yeah. So don't look at the English so much as more as the literal meaning of the words. But yes, I agree. it makes more sense for talking about a battle, because it seems to be more the structure of the verses.
And cleaving there in a host, did you cover it?
Yes.
I don't know what this.
For the Hajjaj, yeah. So when they, for example, all move into, let's say, Mina, so they all go into one small location where they have to spend the night, etc. So, or going to Arafah or something like that. So this movement from one place to another, when a huge body of people come to a small space. إِنَّ الْإِنسَانَ لِرَبِّهِ لَكَنُودٌ. Indeed, man is ungrateful to his Lord. Kanud is, of course, a word that has many different meanings suggested by scholars. Abu al-Futuh al-Razi in his Rawh al-Jinan gives, or Rawd al-Jinan or Ruh al-Jannan gives 15 different meanings for Kanud. Kanud literally means this sort of ground that is unfertile, that nothing sort of grows in it, but it's used for a person that is sort of not a generous person, a stingy person, selfish person. So nothing comes out of it, so to speak. No barakah comes out of it, no fruits come out of it for anyone else. It's used for that type of person as well. But yeah, Abu Futuh al-Razi gives 15 different meanings what Kanud means here in this verse. Inna al-insana li rabbihi lakanud. Certainly man is towards his Lord Kanud, here translated as ungrateful. We can mention 4 of those meanings suggested by him. One such meaning is that a person who always remembers and recounts his problems and the sort of setbacks that he's had, but never remembers his blessings. So this is a Kanud person, and ungrateful, as it's been translated here. So in the sense that you always think about the bad things that's happened to you, you never think about the good things. Another meaning he suggested is the one who eats alone and doesn't share his bounties, and he mentions a hadith as well to back this up. So there's a hadith from the Prophet ﷺ that has been mentioned, that he says that do you know who is the one who is Kanud? أَتَعْرِفُونَ مَنْ هُوَ كَنُودٌ? And then they ask him, no, we don't know, Ya Rasulullah, what does it mean? It's الكنود الذي يأكل وحده ويمنع رفده ويضرب عبده. Kanud is the one who eats by himself, يأكل وحده, and يمنع رفده, he sort of prohibits his generosity, he doesn't give to anyone else, he's not generous towards others. ويضرب عبده, and he beats his servant. So this is again one meaning that's mentioned for Kanud, someone who is, as we would say in English, self-centered, so to speak. And thirdly, he mentions someone who ignores his friend in times of need. We have a hadith, not mentioning the word Kanud, but about this sort of idea that ignoring your friends in time of need. That we have a hadith from Prophet ﷺ that says, من كان في حاجة أخيه المؤمن كان الله في حاجته. Whoever is in the time, who is present in the time of need of his Muslim brother, Allah will be present there in the time of his need. So the idea, of course, there is that if we are there to help others, then others will be there to help us as well. And of course, this is a very good advice in general for forming a Muslim society, isn't it? That in the same way that here in Finland, many say we have a very Islamic system here in Finland, isn't it? That's the whole idea that we all pay taxes so that if someone is unemployed or sick, etc., they can get unemployment benefit, or they can get free health care and so on and so forth, as a sort of helping others in their time of need. And then we all benefit from that as well. So then if I myself tomorrow became unemployed or sick or whatever, I then too can benefit from that system. So creating this idea of a society where people sort of are helping each other, are there for each other in the time of need. This is a very Islamic sort of concept, of course. And fourth opinion that he mentions is the one who pleads for help when he is in need and ignores his friends when they are in need themselves. So of course, all of these have the sort of meaning of someone who is, as we would say in English, self-centered, egocentric, narcissistic type of person who just cares about themselves and doesn't care about others. That's the connecting thread in all of these sort of meanings. And of course here Allah says, إِنَّ الْإِنسَانَ لِرَبِّهِ لَكَنُودٌ. Certainly man is sort of this kanud, self-centered, but insan, or human beings. Does this mean that every human being is narcissistic and self-centered? If you are a pessimist, you might argue yes, but of course no. The idea here is that insan here means just some people who are like that. That this is a quality that's unfortunately so common like this. All people are so dumb. I don't mean if I say anything, people are so dumb, or people are so selfish. I don't mean, of course, literally everyone is selfish, or everyone is dumb, or something like that. But I mean like, there's so many who are like that, etc. Or people don't care about politics. It doesn't mean that everybody doesn't care about politics. It just means in general, of course, people don't care about something that doesn't affect them. There's a general nature that we find amongst many human beings. And the Quran uses this sort of language, of course, elsewhere as well. Uses the word insan, but it just means sort of this sort of bad people, or some people who are like this. This is a common quality amongst some people. So, for example, in Surah Al-Ma'arij, إِنَّ الْإِنسَانَ خُلِقَ هَلُوعًا إِذَا مَسَّهُ الشَّرُّ جَزُوعًا وَإِذَا مَسَّهُ الْخَيْرُ مَنُوعًا. Surely man is created of hasty temperament, being greatly grieved when evil afflicts him, and stingy when good befalls him. So the whole idea of kanud coming up there as well, that one of the meanings of kanud, but here with the word halu'a, and the word insan, man is like this. Not every human being, but many human beings are like this.
Why does it say to his Lord?
Yeah, so because of course, who has given us all these good things? So when you are self-centered, when you are selfish, when you are the one who only looks at the bad things and never remembers the good things, who's the one who gave you the good things? Who's the one who gave you the wealth that you're now being greedy with, and you're not helping others? Who's the one who gave you the opportunity to help others, the power to do good, but you choose to just help yourself, etc. So when you're being like this, you're being in fact ungrateful towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So he's reminding you that who has given you all these things? I have given you. If I've given you this wealth, you should spend it in a way that's good and helpful, not just to serve yourself.
Selfish and ungrateful are different, right?
Yeah, but that's the thing, isn't it? It's sort of connecting the two things, that when you're being selfish, then you're being ungrateful as well, because Allah didn't give you that money so that you spend it all on yourself. He didn't increase you in wealth so that you spend it all on yourself. He gave it to you as an opportunity to help others. And by keeping it for yourself, you're being ungrateful towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, who's the one who's given it to you, and He's ordered you to help others.
He provided you the opportunity.
Yeah. So if I give you, 1,000 euros, I'm like, okay, I want you to spend this on helping others, etc. And then you spend it all on a trip for yourself. And I say, hey, you're a really ungrateful person. I didn't give this to you to spend it on a trip for yourself. I gave it to you so you do some good in the community, or you help some other people, etc. Yeah? So you've done wrong towards me, the one who is given to you. You've been ungrateful towards the help that I've shown you, etc. Yeah.
Again, and going back to the point that you said, not everybody is selfish.
Yeah.
Not being pessimistic over here, but I think it's not very not being too far-fetched as well, because everybody has a bit of selfishness, not too extreme, but even in daily life, in a small aspect as well, you do end up being a bit selfish. You might, for example, even on sitting on the bus, you choose the best seat.
Right.
And compared to the other person who might need it better, but you say, I'm going to sit there, irrespective of...
Well, if it's empty and no one else there and you sit there, that's fine.
Yeah,
but then if you are sitting there and then old lady comes in, on a crutch, and then you're like, I'm just going to sit here, she can stand, and all the other seats are taken. Then, how would you describe that kind of a person?
No, that was a bit too extreme.
But how would you describe that kind of a person?
The person...
Yeah. He was just sitting there. There's an old lady next to him, on a crutch,
selfish.
and all.
Apathetic.
Exactly. Then you say, okay, this is a kanud person. They say this is a Kanun person, What if he was in that situation that he needed that help? He needed to sit down. He had a crutch. Would he not appreciate someone getting up who's healthy, someone who's healthy, someone who has the capacity? So it's a good example you gave, He's been given that help. He's been given that strength. Not so that he can be selfish and take it for himself, but to help others, to show, hey, I'll help you sit down, I'll help you get off, do something like that. So this is an act of being ungrateful towards the one who gave you this thing. But the fact that, okay, you want to sit on a nice seat when there's empty ones around and there's lots of empty seats for other people to sit on, or there's no one else in the bus. Of course, we like to be comfortable. Nothing wrong with that.
But there's comforts of the world
that
end up making you selfish as well. And
once we start being sort of taking the rights of others away because we want more for ourselves, that's where the evil starts coming in, isn't it? So when we become inconsiderate, what we say in English, self-centered, narcissistic, that's when it's bad. Wanting to be comfortable, and that's why, we haven't got to that verse yet, we kind of interrupted us, but when we come, وَإِنَّهُ لِحُبِّ الْخَيْرِ لَشَدِيدٌ, certainly he is avid in the love of wealth. Of course, in Arabic, the word instead of wealth is khayr, that which is good. So yes, every person likes to have good things. He likes to have nice things. But then, when does that become bad? So when does that wealth, which is in essence something that's good, Allah, why does he use khayr instead of wealth? Why does he not say, وَإِنَّهُ لِحُبِّ الْمَالِ لَشَدِيدٌ? He is avid in the love of money. He says, avid in the love of that which is good. Because wealth in itself is not evil. Wanting to have nice things and be comfortable, etc., this is not evil. Allah has not prohibited us from wanting these. But then once it becomes self-centered and narcissistic, and I want so much that others will suffer, that's when it becomes evil. When I want to take away the rights of others, when I want to have more for me, and that means less for others, and so on and so forth. That one, it becomes evil. But we'll get to that in a bit. وَإِنَّهُ عَلَى ذَلِكَ لَشَهِيدٌ. Of course, not all people, but إِنَّهُ عَلَى ذَلِكَ لَشَهِيدٌ. And certainly he is a witness over to that. There's some disagreement amongst the scholars who innahu refers to here. He, is this the he referring to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or is it referring to man? Some have said وَإِنَّهُ عَلَى ذَلِكَ شَهِيدٌ. It is Allah who is a witness to that. But most of the scholars say no. The context of the verses, especially the following ones, for example, وَإِنَّهُ لِحُبِّ الْخَيْرِ لَشَدِيدٌ. Again, the same. And certainly he is avid in love of wealth, shows that this is talking constantly about human beings, man, and not man and then suddenly God and then man again. It's a sort of a strange jump there. So it is man who is a witness. So meaning that I am a witness to it. But as we mentioned in the beginning, that we can have the wider meaning as well. So by using this sort of ambiguous innahu, it can mean that both man and God are witnesses to this. So both God knows our nature, but we too are aware of our nature. So man himself is aware of these flaws inside himself. As Allah says in Surah Al-Qiyamah, بَلِ الْإِنسَانُ عَلَى نَفْسِهِ بَصِيرًا وَلَوْ أَلْقَى مَعَاذِيرًا. Certainly man is aware of his own soul, even though he might present excuses. So I know my own flaws. I make excuses for my own flaws. I justify my own flaws. But I do know that most of the time I'm aware of these things. And if I reflect, I can say, okay, that was a bit selfish of me. I shouldn't have done that. It's a wealth that is acquired through righteous means and spent in a righteous way is a good thing. It's not a bad thing in and of itself. It's about how we use it. It can turn into evil. How we regard it, it can turn into evil. So, the same way the soul of a man that has the capacity for good and evil, in itself it's good. Allah didn't force us to be evil, etc. It's a good that we have the choice, the freedom. But then, if we do use it for wrong, it becomes evil. If we do use it for right, it becomes good. How you use it is what makes it khair.
And the he is the person.
The person, of course, yeah. So people love wealth, and of course, as we mentioned, one of the themes was that war, and how wars are sort of often driven by that greed, and how much, and it's of course this sort of ironic use of khair then in that sense, how evil are the things that we do for wealth, but wealth is described as good. So it becomes, it's a literary device irony, isn't it? So again, using a very ironic way of describing it, isn't it? What? It's type of sarcasm, isn't it? Irony, we would say. So sarcasm is more, of course, your tone of voice, but here we would say ironical. So it's an ironical way of describing this as good when, the dust of that battlefield has settled and, there's the dead people lying around. You say, oh, this is very good. Of course, the act of jihad in itself is good as well, and defending and defending yourself against attackers. But what brought those attackers there was greed, which is not a good thing, but they describe it as good.
And we call khairat as well. Khairat. The money which we
Charity.
give to charity.
Yeah,
Khairat.
of
That's
course. So
also
if you use it for good, it's good. It's khair. In essence, it's a good thing. Allah hasn't created anything evil. In essence, it's a good thing. But if we use it bad, so of course, but this brings us again to the reflection of our human nature. Okay, I have this free will. In essence, it's a good thing. Am I now using it for khair? Do I love the khair more, or do I love the evil more? So it makes you question. Are the things that I look at as good, are they really good things? As I said, a person is aware of himself. He might make excuses. He might justify things for himself. So here he's saying, shine that light on your soul and examine it. Am I loving things that are actually good? Are the things that I thought I was doing, which I thought as normal, are they actually self-centered things? Are they narcissistic things? Am I being greedy? Am I being ungenerous? And so on and so forth. So this sort of theme of self-examination. And of course, it's bringing us now to these next two verses that we should do this self-examination, this pondering on ourselves before this moment comes. أَفَلَا يَعْلَمُ إِذَا بُعْثِرَ مَا فِي الْقُبُورِ وَحُصِّلَ مَا فِي الصُّدُورِ. Does he not know when what is in the graves is turned over and what is in the breast is divulged? بُعْثِرَ comes from بَعْثَرَ, which means to upturn and extract. So here, of course, when the graves are turned over, meaning that the contexts are sort of spit out. So what went inside is then brought out of it, spat out of it, and comes out as alive, referring obviously to resurrection, and وَحُصِّلَ مَا فِي الصُّدُورِ, and that which is inside the chest is brought out. حُصِّلَ come from tahsil, literally means to take out the core or a seed from inside its shell or its skin. So to take out like this, the seed of like a nut out from its shell means the hussila. It's also used for when you take out minerals from inside the ground by mining, etc., to extract it. So here, of course, the idea of as we said, the angels diving in and bringing out, divulging those things which are inside our souls, the core of a human being is brought out. يوم تبلى السرائر يومئذ تعرضون لا تخفى منكم خافية. The day when you are presented to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, nothing is hidden from you, as we have in the Quran. So this idea of course, everything being presented. There is a question, we're running out of time, can't spend much on it. But there is a debate, a long debate, and we could have had more time to discuss it, about this. بُعْثِرَ مَا فِي الْقُبُورِ, when the graves are upturned and that which is sort of inside the graves is resurrected. So someone said that, okay, does this mean that only people who are buried in graves are resurrected? Like what if someone is burned and they're scattered in an ocean or something, as nowadays is popular to do these sort of things. Would he be resurrected as well? You wouldn't describe that as a grave and being upturned from the grave, etc. Of course, this takes us back to a larger theological problem that talks about resurrection, and if it's a physical resurrection, are you resurrected with that body that you had, as the Quran sort of seems to be implying, isn't it? That the bones are brought to life, that which is inside the grave is brought to life, that body which died is also the body that comes alive. They refer to this wider problem in theology as the problem of al-akil wal-ma'kul, the eater and the eaten. So this is because a criticism has been presented that if a cannibal comes and eats another person and they digest him, then who in the day of judgment, when, for example, he has to be resurrected, both the cannibal and the one who was eaten, how are they resurrected? Because now they become sort of one, isn't it? He's digested parts of himself inside himself. So that's why there's the problem of the eater and the eaten. Of course, the Quran, when it talks about resurrection, it usually talks about it with the simile of how the earth springs to life with plants after it's died, after a sort of winter or whatever. Then when rain comes, then it comes back to life. For example, وَاللَّهُ الَّذِي أَرْسَلَ الرِّيَاحَ فَتُثِيرُ سَحَابًا فَسُقْنَاهُ إِلَى بَلَدٍ مَيِّتٍ. Allah is the one who sends the winds, and they bring with it clouds, and they sort of water the dead ground. فَأَحْيَيْنَا بِهِ الْأَرْضَ بَعْدَ مَوْتِهَا. And with it we give life to the dead earth after it had died. And then he ends with saying, كَذَلِكَ النُّشُورِ. This is how the nash will occur. This is how the sort of resurrection will occur. How you will be raised from your graves. So of course we know a plant, the huge tree, what's its beginning is a tiny seed.
Yes.
So only a small speck is required to bring, a giant sort of. Or Allah talks about, when, for example, Surah Yasin, ضرب لنا مثلا ونسي خلقه. The finale, إن ربهم بهم يومئذ لخبير. Indeed, their Lord will be best aware of them that day. Of course, this doesn't mean, as in the English translation, he's tried to point it out. It doesn't mean that Allah will be aware of us only on that day. Of course, the translation should be, indeed, their Lord will be aware of them on that day. He's added this word best there because, of course, it doesn't mean that Allah is unaware of us now and only on the day of judgment He will be aware. No, He's always aware. This is an emphatic. Certainly He will be aware of them on that day. Just like we have in Surah Al-Fatiha, Maliki Yawmiddin. He is the king of the day of judgment, the owner of the day of judgment. Not that He's not the king now, or He's not the owner now. Or we have in Surah in the dua of Josh al-Kabir, Alladhi fil qiyamati mulku, the one in whose kingdom will be on the day of judgment. Not that it's not now His kingdom, it's all His kingdom. He's the owner now, He is aware of us now. But that's when it becomes apparent, that when it becomes undeniable, so to speak, that He is the owner. No one can no longer deny it. So no one can deny it on the day of judgment, that He is aware of us, that He knew us. Now we can lie to ourselves. Now we can sort of be unaware. We can be in that state of sleep, of that sort of